You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again, and today, man, we have another show lined up for y'all. We're going to talk to a special guest. Today's topic is all about leadership. We're going to talk to Belinda Ernst. She is the founder and the amazing CEO of this amazing company, Larilha. And first and foremost, we're going to learn all about her and her amazing career, all her leadership skills. She has spent over more than 15 years in Australian federal and state governments. She's been blessed to do amazing leadership with building teams in different functions and managing and all that good stuff. So first and foremost, I want to welcome you, Belinda, to the show. Say, how you doing?
Thanks very much for having me. It's great to be with you today and have a chat about all things leadership.
I kind of said in the beginning, you're CEO, founder, director of Larilha. First and foremost, what inspired you to be in this field? And tell us a little bit about your career, because I understand that you were working, your day job before you decided to go full blown in business.
Yeah, sure. So you sort of touched on a couple of good highlights there already. I had sort of this close to 2 decades worth of experience in Australian government, so federal and state level, spending a lot of time on the road working with clients. And, I think when I look back, I was probably always most interested in that people side of the business. And, I'd always find myself observing the leadership of these client companies. And, I started to become really attuned to picking up clues about good and bad leadership. And so a lot of my drive to actually go out on my own and set up my own company really stemmed from that observation of leaders. And then, of course, I had my own experiences, both of being led and in trying to be a good leader myself. And so over time, this all accumulated into this bundle of information and experience and knowledge. And I found myself yearning more and more to really focus my energy solely in this leadership space. I think one of the things for me was that I'd seen the good, the bad, and the ugly when it came to leadership over the years, even some pretty sort of ridiculous types of things. And so I was also really aware that a lot of leaders were seeking support. It can be really quite lonely being a leader at times. And I think that's really the essence of why I do what I do. I wanted to provide that support and be a partner for leaders so that they're not on their own.
And part of your task being in your field before you went your own boss CEO, you improve systems. So give us some examples, some of the operational systems that you were able to make better.
So I think one of the key areas of focus for me when I was working in government was really was focused largely on economic development, on investment attraction, on assisting small businesses to gain access to supply chain opportunities. And so I suppose I was working with businesses in many and varied types of ways. A lot of it came down to, I suppose identifying a more strategic approach and then plugging in the operational component behind that. So for a lot of businesses, there was so much focus, I think, on getting the end result. And that part was fine, but there wasn't a clear strategy to get there. And so what I was seeing was a lot of operational processes that were quite haphazard, I suppose, in an attempt to achieve a particular goal. But there really wasn't a strategic plan in place to actually make that happen. So a lot of my energy was focused on almost taking a step back, if you like, to then rebuild out those processes and make them more effective ultimately.
Once again, listen to I Am Refocused Radio, talking to our guest today, Belinda Ernst, leadership coach and consultant. When you are building these opportunities, it sounds like just to make things operate smoothly and find those weak points. What were some of the core values that you found was very, what's the way I'm trying to say this? That helped you to make progress and things to grow into having a smoother process, if you will?
I think, this is part of what really led me on my own journey, I suppose, is that I saw that a lot of the essence of it was about really needing to shift the focus. And what I mean by that is businesses, understandably, and especially small businesses where there's a lot of pressure in terms of a cash flow and things like that. But the focus was very much, I think, on, if you like, sort of the wins. It was about securing contracts.
And when you look back from where you started to where you are today, what's some of the key issues in leadership? And you kind of touched on it a little bit, but let's dive deeper. Based on your experience, what's some of the common patterns that you see with struggles of leadership?
I think probably the one of the most common ones would be not having any or not having enough emotional intelligence, I think. And that's not something that's intentional. It's something that I suppose just happens sort of naturally as people go on, when you don't start to take a sort of a closer look at your own leadership and start to identify what your own blind spots are. And I think that that's always, a key issue. And sometimes you see leaders, and, you can see this at the highest level in an organization. You can have what might be perceived as, a nice leader, a nice CEO, but that is not necessarily effective leadership. And that's two very different things. And I think that the blind spot is, no, there's more than one. I think the blind spots are the things that really hold leaders back. And it's about uncovering them. And it's all about personal growth, really, for a leader. It's about taking a look at yourself and thinking about the things that you can do better. What strengths can you draw on? That's another big one. Being better able to identify your strengths and leveraging them in a way that better supports your people. I mean, I really think that emotional intelligence piece cannot be overstated. It's, it's a really big one.
And you have true passion for what you do today with your company, Larilha. Speaking of that, when you made that jump, when it was time for you to start this, what was the process like in the beginning of you developing your platform? And what were some of the key things you learned along the way?
It's a really good question. I've learned a lot of things, I think, about business and also about myself. When I started out, I suppose I was fortunate in that I'd had a lot of experience speaking with leaders over the years and learning to understand what some of their key issues were, where they really wanted support, and also some potential gaps in the market, if you like, where there wasn't really necessarily quite the right type of support for leaders. And so when I started out, and realistically, I'm still in the early stages of business myself. When I first started out, I really focused my energy on learning even more. So, taking all of that information that I'd built up over the years and then essentially retesting that again with the market and making sure that my thinking was accurate and validating that I understood the requirements in the market. And then I suppose it's really been a matter of connecting with the right people who can benefit from something like leadership coaching and consulting. And sometimes it's actually about changing a perception. So often in small business, understandably, there's not as much, the resource availability, is much more limited than you have in big business when it comes to leadership development. And so sometimes it's about an educational piece, essentially, and helping different segments in the market understand what the real value is to them. So say for a small business, leadership coaching can actually be a far more cost-effective and, overall actually just a more effective bespoke solution for them rather than a more expensive leadership development course. And that's not to say that leadership development courses don't have merit, because they absolutely do. But I think sometimes it's about what is best at a point in time for any leader of an organization. And I suppose that's where I've really been positioning myself and my business since I've started.
Once again, listen to I'm Refocus Radio, talking to our guest today, Belinda Ernst, and she is the founder and CEO of her company, Larilha. You can go to her website, larilha.com.au. And going a little bit back to your career before you made the jump, you had the experience of traveling to small, medium-sized businesses. When you look at your professional career experience, what's some of the things that you took away from that you still apply to your personal business today?
I wouldn't be where I am if I hadn't had that experience on the road and visiting clients. So the years that I spent doing that opened my eyes to so many things. I learned a lot about people. I learned a lot about establishing connections with people. And, that observation of different businesses, different company cultures taught me a lot about the way different organizations operate, what does and doesn't work. It really helped me to be better able to identify a lot of things that are left unsaid. And I think in the role that I have now, that is such a critical thing, being able to really understand the lay of the land, if you like, without actually having to have a conversation. There's a lot that you can pick up on. There's a lot of cues that are there, and it takes a long time, I think, to really develop the skills and the ability to pick up on all of those. But those years on the road certainly helped me to do that. And I also learnt, I suppose, just a lot about life and a lot about business. So working in an area like defense industry, defense industry isn't just, this set space, if you like. There are so many different subsectors within that industry that it opened my eyes to so many different business worlds. And it was fantastic to see all kinds of things. So as an example, I often would come across really innovative, early stage startup type businesses. And that's obviously, a very different environment than you have with, a far more established business, a larger organization. And, things like playing with risk appetite was a big one. So looking at those, early stage startups, and obviously the risk appetite is different than in other businesses. And then that risk is impacted also by, the type of industry that you operate in, the specific service or product that you provide to the market, all of those things. But that also taught me a lot. So the way different leaders managed their own, I suppose not their appetite to risk, but how they responded to risk, and I suppose how they managed a level of risk that was acceptable to the business, to the industry, but still enabled a platform for innovation to occur. And that's a challenge as a leader, I think, is striking that right balance with risk, because when you shut that risk down totally and you become extremely risk averse, you lose that innovative thinking. And over time, that really degrades the environment for your own team. So that was a really big one. I think that was a really big takeaway.
And for those listening right now to this episode, say they are a new leader or emerging leader, what are some of the skill sets that they should start learning or finding resources to tap into for them to be able to successfully become a better leader?
It's a really good question. And I think that can be a really challenging time for people, is when they are in that emerging leader space and the sense of wanting to get it right, if you like. I think the key thing when you're starting out is really understanding the impact of communication. And, the key thing is opening those channels of communication with your team and being open to learn from them. I think spending more time listening to your team rather than speaking to them is a really critical component, and understanding a little bit about yourself. And this sort of goes back to an earlier point, I suppose, around understanding your own blind spots and also understanding your own strengths. It's good to know where your strengths are so you can leverage them, but it's also really important to understand a little bit more about yourself and the areas that you can improve on. And when you think about all of the aspects of emotional intelligence, and you think about, as an example, something like emotional regulation. So that's something really important as a leader. And if you think of yourself as an emerging leader, it's not necessarily something that's at the forefront of your mind, but being able to regulate your emotional response in a situation sets the tone for your team. So that ability to control your emotional response, and it's down to even things like, your body language. It's not just the things that you say, but as you step up into more senior leadership roles and you become very much, I suppose, the shield for your team, if you like, and you're protecting your team often from, a lot of the external influence that is sort of surrounding you and the pressures that come down. I think that's when you're really leaning on some of those skills. It's understanding yourself and how you can best respond so that you can support your team in a better way. And I think probably lastly, the other really, there's lots of critical components, but something else that I think is absolutely critical in the early days for emerging leaders is being crystal clear on exactly what their role and responsibilities are, and that you really understand exactly what it is you're delivering, the scope of your responsibility, and also what your authority is really important, because that's all the factors that lead into your sense of empowerment and your ability to build confidence as a leader. So the clearer you are on exactly what you and your team are responsible for, the more empowered you are to make decisions to set direction for your team, and it sets you up for success.
Once again, listen to I'm Refocus Radio, talking to our guest, Belinda Ernst. You go to her website, larilha.com.au. And when you are helping people with leadership development and executive leadership, and you're consulting them and asking the tough questions, it sounds like, I like what you said about the leader being a shield for their team, because that tells me accountability for them personally. It's obvious to the need to be accountable and responsible as a leader. So you're leading by example and not just by your fluff, your talking. But why is it so crucial for a leader to always kind of reflect, to make sure that they are staying consistent with their personal skill set versus just using a title?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I think it doesn't matter how experienced you are, at different points, you will make mistakes as a leader. Nobody's perfect. And if you don't take the time to sit back and reflect, you really run the risk of forming bad habits that will essentially lead you to make more mistakes, and not even mistakes, but perhaps not handling every situation in the best way that you possibly could. You're setting an example for your team when you really take action and have the courage, I suppose, sometimes to make changes. Sometimes things like, you see these, you see the 360-degree feedback, used quite often in organizations. And it's a really wonderful source of information in terms of the things that, you're doing well, the things that you could be doing better to support your team. But if you don't act on it, then it's just useless. And I think it's, the reflection part is important, because you need to understand more about yourself in order to make any change. But really the critical part then is actually making the change, right? It's actually taking action to improve and wanting to do it. And I think the thing is, a lot of leadership is really down to perspective. And what is it about leadership? Well, what is leadership really to somebody? What does it mean? And I think if you think that your core purpose, and in my opinion, this should be your core purpose as a leader, is to see your people grow and succeed and achieve the best things in life that they can achieve, right? Professionally, that's what you want to see for your people. So when you take the time to work on yourself and, you build your team up, so you sort of strike that balance between, say, we're going back to your comment about acting as a shield, and at times you're absolutely doing that. And then you're also exposing them a little bit to the elements as well along the way, because you're building their confidence and their resilience, and they're watching you all the time. So you want your team ultimately to emulate positive behaviors. So you need to keep yourself in check all the time, and you need to be thinking about what you can tweak, little steps that you can take to improve. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's just you need to learn from it and then implement action that shows that you're committed to always improving yourself. And then what you see is your own team starting to do the same things. And then ultimately, if you're taking these types of steps, then you get the absolute best possible result, which is you see your people achieving wonderful things. And there's just no greater satisfaction as a leader than watching your people soar and going on to wonderful things. That's absolutely the best possible outcome for any leader.
And for our audience, by the way, we're talking to our guest, Belinda Ernst. She's the founder, CEO of her company, Larilha. And you can go to her website, larilha.com.au. I want to make sure I say that right, larilha.com.au. When someone's listening to this, what's the call to action that you would want our listeners to take and see if they will be a good fit for your consulting services?
I think if anybody's listening and they want to learn more, then I would really welcome the opportunity to have a free discovery call, with anyone, which you can book through the website. And it's a great opportunity to have a chat, learn more about coaching and consulting from my business, and see if the fit might be right.
What's some of the things you found really useful for you personally to practice every day or just as often as you can, so that way you're always in the best position to help those around you? Yeah,
sure. Look, I think one of the key things is, a cycle of feedback. So you won't know what your own blind spots are. You can uncover some of them by seeing how people respond to different situations, how people communicate with you in different ways, and things like that. But it's quite challenging to uncover your own blind spots. So the feedback piece is really important, but it's also striking a balance there, right? And not taking that feedback to a point that it's actually really turning into validation. So I think that's a key thing that I see sometimes, especially with emerging leaders, is finding that balance a little challenging. So I would say, you need to trust in your own knowledge and experience, and, take action where, you know that you have the competence to do so. Ask questions where you don't, and seek feedback regularly, but don't fall into the trap of constantly seeking validation, because it's a vicious cycle and it undermines your own confidence. That's definitely a key one. I think the other one, which I touched on before, is communication. And I think whatever degree of communication you currently have, dial it up a notch. You can never communicate enough with your people. It's not, well, I'm sure you actually probably can, but I'm sure you understand the point that, the more you communicate, the better. And I suppose even a better way of thinking it might be not even around the volume of communication, but the different types of communication, and understanding what suits your team. And people respond to different styles of communication better than other ways. And I think that's a really critical component, is understanding your audience and adapting your communication, ensuring that the frequency is sufficient, so people aren't left feeling like they're isolated. And I think COVID has probably, really brought that one home for a lot of people that may not have previously been in roles where they worked with a team that was geographically dispersed. And now I think there's a lot more of that. And so that element becomes even more critical as a leader. So I think the communication one is the other extremely important factor there.
We're talking to our guest, the one and only Belinda Ernst. She is the owner, founder, director of Larilha. You can go to her website, larilha.com.au. And if you're ready to turn leadership into a passion like she has, you might want to go visit her right now and connect with her. First and foremost, Belinda, I want to say thanks for taking time in your schedule talking to us today. And what will you say to our audience before we leave?
Thanks so much for having me. And I think that the key takeaway for the audience is just to sit back and have a little bit of a look at yourself, I suppose, and your leadership style, and start really taking some time to think about some ways that you can really leverage your strengths and work on some things that you know you could probably improve on. And, you know, in no time, I'm sure you'll become just as passionate about leadership as I am.
Once again, talking to Belinda Ernst here on Army Focus Radio. I want to say thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule talking to us today.
Thank you so much.